Wow, thank you, Aaron, and thank you for such a lovely introduction. And I suppose giving me a wonderful opportunity today. You've given me a platform today to live out my own sense of purpose. And I think it was Mark Twain who once said, the two most important days in our life, what are they? And you know, when I ask audiences that question all over the world, in the opportunities that I get to engage with different sectors in different parts of the world, I would say that 99.9% of the time, the response I get to that question is that Mark Twain said that the two most important days in our life is the day we were born and the day we die. And you know, when people say that to me, I kind of reflect after my talk or when I'm lying in bed of an evening, and I think to myself, what is it about the human species that we are so pessimistic about life, in that we can't wait for the second most important day in our life, which is the day that we die? So guess what? Stick me in an incubator on day 2, switch all the machines off, let me die, and it'll be such an important day. And of course, Mark Twain didn't say that. He said the two most important days in our life is the day we were born and the day we find out why we were born. And you know, as I speak to you all today, every single one of you, including myself, I honestly believe has got a unique gift. You were born with a unique gift. And when you uncover that gift, you can bring that gift to the world to make it a better place. But seldom do we get time to reflect on what are some of the things that we truly, truly care about, beyond being a good mother, a good father, a good partner, a good leader in an organization. What is it that we truly, truly care about? And what is that unique gift? What is it that people have told me, or you throughout your life, that you're good at, but you kind of dismiss the compliment? But there's a theme, there's a red thread that is the uncovering of that unique gift. And you know, I'm very, very clear on my own sense of why, my own sense of purpose. And it's a very simple purpose. And that is to try and create workplaces. And you know, a kindergarten is a workplace. An NHS trust is a workplace. A regiment in an army is a workplace. And yes, HSBC is a workplace. Unilever is a workplace. But I want us to have workplaces. I want us to have friendship groups. I want us to have families where every single person in that setting feels that they genuinely have the choice to put their hand up and to just ask for some help if they are struggling with a common form of mental ill health. Now, I don't think that that's a very audacious purpose. And let me tell you why. Because in every workplace, anywhere in the world, in every friendship group, in any family setting, if you were suffering from a common physical illness, you'd put your hand up and you'd ask for some help. Yet in the 21st century, when all of us are mental, all of us are emotional, all of us are physical, in the 21st century, we still have friendship groups, families, workplaces all over the world where people feel ashamed, afraid, embarrassed to put their hand up and ask for some help if they are struggling with a common form of mental ill health. That could be depression, it could be anxiety, it could be bipolar. How can that be? How can that be in the 21st century? Now, you might say to me, Geoff, why are you so passionate about trying to create that kind of world? And the reason I'm so passionate about it is I've got a bit of a story, and I'm going to share some of that story with you today. But before I share the story with you, I just want to say to those that are listening, there might be bits of my story that feel raw. They might trigger some of you in some kind of way. And I would really, really plead and ask anybody who feels in somewhat triggered to please just turn to somebody that you love, that you trust, and just have the conversation. Talk about how you're feeling. And the story started back in 2008. I'll never forget the date. I'll never forget the date. It was the 25th of January, 2008. And the reason I don't forget that date is because the 26th of January, 2008, my eldest daughter, Jennifer, she was going to turn 13. So you can imagine how much excitement there was in our household that evening. Here was this young girl who at midnight was going to go through a rite of passage. She was going to become a teenager. And I'm sure there are people who are listening to me today, they can resonate with that feeling the day before you became a teenager. And at midnight, on the 25th of Jan, 2008, I got woken up with the most massive, massive panic attack. Now, I had never experienced a panic attack in all my life. I don't think the word panic attack was part of my vocabulary. I don't think I've ever had a conversation with anybody about a panic attack. The ends of my fingers are tingling. The ends of my toes are tingling. My heart is beating profusely. I'm struggling to regulate my breathing. And the bed sheets are wet with sweat. And so I bumped my wife, Debbie, and I said, Deb, I think I'm about to have a heart attack. And she said, why? And I tried to explain how I was feeling and what I was experiencing. And she said, well, why don't you get up, walk around the room and take a deep breath? And so I got up, I walked around the room, I took a deep breath. I took many deep breaths, and slowly, slowly, the levels of anxiety began to subside. Got back into bed, but I couldn't go back to sleep. Why? 3 reasons. The first is that I was petrified that if I went back to sleep, it would happen again. And I'm sure there are people listening to me today who've experienced a panic attack, and you wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy. The second reason I couldn't go back to sleep is the adrenaline was pumping through my body. And thirdly, and I don't know where this came from, ladies and gentlemen, but I developed a capability to catastrophize over the most insignificant issues in my life. I remember getting up at about 3 in the morning. I had a sore on the inside of my mouth. And I went into the bathroom. I interrogated the sore. I looked in the mirror. I got back into bed. And I convinced myself that I had the beginnings of throat and mouth cancer. And I catastrophized about the fact that I was going to die of cancer. 7 o'clock the next morning, who comes running into our bedroom? Jennifer. It's her 13th birthday. And we have a tradition at home where on birthdays, we have presents at the end of the bed and we all open presents together. And her little sister, Anna, comes running in afterwards. And all I can say to Jen and to Anna and to Debbie is please, please, just leave me alone. Please just leave me alone. There's no ways I can engage in anything that is enthusiastic, where there's laughter, where there's excitement. And all I want to do is I just want to take the duvet and I just want to pull it over my head. And for the life of me, I can't get myself out of bed. Debbie takes the girls downstairs. Jen opens her presents. Debbie takes them to school. She gets back at about 10 o'clock. Where am I? Still in bed. Now, I'm not the sort of guy who's in bed at 10 o'clock most mornings. I'm a typical South African. And as Erin said, I love the outdoors. I love my cycling, swimming, running. I'll get up of a morning and go and do one of those bits of exercise. And here I am on my daughter's 13th birthday, struggling to do what most of us do every single day without giving it a second thought. And that's swing our legs onto the side of the bed, onto the floor, and up we get. I can't do it. I feel paralyzed by the anxiety that I'm feeling. Debbie says to me, Geoff, what's wrong? I said, I don't know. I just can't get myself out of bed. I feel so anxious. I feel paralyzed by this anxiety. She said, look, you should go and speak to somebody. Go and see somebody. I said, who? She said, well, why don't you go and see the doctor? I said to her, what do you mean a doctor? I've got no aches. I've got no pains. I'm not feeling nauseous. I haven't got a temperature. Why should I go and see a doctor? To cut a long story short, at midday, I'm in a doctor's rooms. And I am diagnosed with anxiety-fueled depression. Me? Depression? Yes, me. Do you know what my understanding of the word depression was up until that point? I spent 25 years working for Unilever. And I remember when Unilever moved me from South Africa to the UK to look after, from an HR point of view, the Africa, Middle East, and Turkey business group. I remember I'd been living in the UK for about 2 years. And around January time, people would come and talk to me about a thing called SAD. And I'd say to them, what's SAD? And they would say, no, that's seasonal affects disorder. And I remember I used to think to myself, what is that? So I'd say to them, come on, tell me, what is seasonal affects disorder? And they would say, no, the weather, it can influence your mood. Middle of January in the UK, middle of winter. I remember I used to think to myself, what a load of hogwash. The weather influence your mood. As Piers Morgan would probably say, why don't you just man up, you snowflake? Is kind of what I would think. And here I am on my daughter's 13th birthday, diagnosed with anxiety-fueled depression. As I walk out of the doctor's rooms that day, ladies and gentlemen, I make a decision that saved my life. I don't think I would be speaking to you today. I don't think I would be doing the work that I've been doing over the last 8 years since leaving Unilever, helping organizations, workplaces, to really address the stigma of mental ill health had it not been for this decision. I'm not sure I'd be alive today. But the decision I took as I walked out of the doctor's rooms that day was that I refused to be burdened by the stigma that is associated with depression. Now, I was lucky in many ways to be able to make that decision. And let me tell you what was in my favor. Firstly, I'm the sort of guy who wears his heart on his sleeve. So what you see is what you get. I'm not very good at masking my feelings. I'm not very good at compartmentalizing myself. So look me in the eye and you'll see there's something wrong. I am so grateful that I have a personality like that. What you see is what you get. So that was in my favor. Secondly, I got a diagnosis. The doctor had given me a diagnosis. It kind of liberated me to know what was wrong with me. Thirdly, at the time, I was 20 years into a career with Unilever. I was doing a very senior HR role. I built lots of credibility. I wasn't a young graduate who was just joining an organization or a junior manager who was now trying to make a career. And finally, I had a line manager at the time who had a compassionate relationship to mental ill health. I was so lucky. He had a compassionate relationship to mental ill health. Now, you know why that decision to not be burdened by the stigma saved my life? Because I had to take 3 months off work. There's no ways I could be at work. I was too anxious. I couldn't read a document and remember what I'd read. I couldn't look at some data and analyze that data and make a good judgment. And so I had to take 3 months off work. And during those 3 months, I had dark, dark moments. I had moments when I didn't think life was worth living. I had moments when I thought I was a burden to everybody around me, and the world would be better off without me. But you know, in my darkest, darkest moments, the only thing that kept me going, And the only reason I could feel this was because I'd been open with my family, some close friends, and my colleagues at work. And you know what they gave me in return? They gave me the most powerful emotion in the world. And do you know what it is? It's called love. And you know, in my darkest, darkest moments, just knowing that I was loved by my wife, by my daughters, by my friends, by my colleagues at work, that sense of feeling loved kept me going. And there was one more emotion, one other emotion. And I used to meet with a colleague who 2 years prior to my illness, 2 years prior to my illness, had been so ill with depression that he was admitted to hospital. And I used to meet with Martin every 10 days. And you know what I saw? I saw he was better. Do you know what he gave me? He gave me hope. He just gave me that little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, a sense of hope that I could get better. And so a combination of feeling loved and a sense of hope were probably the most powerful ingredients in my recovery. And yes, of course, I took some medication. I did cognitive behavioral therapy. I slowly got back onto my bicycle. But you know, those things don't work for everybody. And everybody has a different view on what works and doesn't work as part of their recovery. But you know what I honestly believe? Is that every single person who might be struggling in silence as I speak to you right now, for them to just feel a sense of love, to feel a sense of hope, I think are the two most powerful ingredients in anyone's recovery. And so, yes, I recover. I slowly go back into Unilever. 2010, I have a bit of a relapse, nothing as bad as 2008. So I'm able to function. I'm able to be at work. And then in October of 2012, I remember leaving Unilever House on Victoria Embankment here in London. And I was on Blackfriars Bridge, walking down to a station called Waterloo Station. And as I got onto the bridge, my phone went. And on the end of the phone was my wife. And she said to me, "Geoff, where are you?" I said, "I'm on the bridge, walking down to the station, I'm coming home." She said, "Please, please, can you try and get home as quickly as possible?" I said, "Why?" She said, "I've got devastating news." You can imagine the first question I asked Debbie: "Are the girls okay?" And she said, "Yes, the girls are okay. But you lost a friend to suicide this afternoon." Now, this friend of mine was the most wonderful human being. He brought so much energy, passion, and compassion to the world. He was the sort of guy that if you went to a party, people would congregate around him. And I think it was Carl Jung who once said, "The brighter the light, the darker the shadow." The brighter the light, the darker the shadow. That was him. He brought so much light and energy to the world. But wow, was there a dark shadow. And you know, I got home that evening and I got into bed and I lay there and I thought to myself, what's the difference between him and me? Here I am 4 years after my crucible moment in life, flourishing in many ways. Why? Because I spend an enormous amount of time looking after the most valuable asset that I have, and that is my well-being. And my friend is gone. My friend is gone. And I lay there, and you know, ladies and gentlemen, I am not an expert in mental health. I am not a psychiatrist. I am not a psychologist. I'm just somebody who's had some lived experience and is trying to do something good in the world with that experience. And I lay there and I came to two simple insights. The first insight I came to was that I'd been able to talk. I'd been able to ask for some help. He couldn't. He was an alpha male South African. There is no ways he could have this conversation, not even with his wife, with his daughters, with his son, with me. I had the badge, I had the t-shirt. And I lay there and I thought to myself, the second insight is that stigma has just killed my friend. Stigma has just killed my friend. Had he had a common physical illness or any physical illness, what would he have done? He would have spoken to his wife about it. He would have gone and seen a doctor. But instead, he was struggling mentally and emotionally and couldn't have that conversation. And that led to the most tragic outcome: suicide. And I lay there and I thought to myself, you know what? That's not fair. That is just not fair. That's not fair that we can talk about our common physical ailments, but we can't talk about our mental and emotional challenges when we need to. It's not fair. It's an injustice in the world. And I thought, you know what? I've got to do something about it. I've got to do something about that. But I didn't know where to start. I'm a South African living down in Surrey here in the UK. Guess what? Most of my mates are a bunch of South Africans because birds of a feather, we all flock together. And at the time I was doing a global job in Unilever, so I had a kind of global network. So how was I going to make any difference here in the UK? And so that night I wrote to somebody who was very influential in the UK. I Googled him. Up comes his website. Bottom right-hand corner is an email address. And so I wrote to a guy called Alistair Campbell, who used to work for Tony Blair. And Alistair at the time was an ambassador for a campaign here in the UK back in 2012, which was called Time to Change, which was all about trying to get people to begin to talk about their mental and emotional struggles, address the stigma. And I just thought, you know what, if I can just meet with Alistair, because he was influential, he'll open some doors, he'll introduce me to some people. Within 10 minutes, I have a response from him. A week later, we meet up in Belsize Park, close to where he lives, here in North London. And you know, ever since that day, he began to open some doors and introduce me to some people, which allowed me to take tiny footsteps on a journey filled with a deep sense of purpose. And that is to create workplaces, family groups, friendship groups all over the world, where we all just feel comfortable and know that we genuinely have the choice to put our hand up and to ask for some help if we are struggling mentally or emotionally. And you know, I'm not saying to you today that had my friend been able to have a conversation, he would definitely be alive today. I can't say that. There's no ways I can say that. But you know what I can say? Is had he been able to have a conversation, I want you to think of a grain of salt. There is a tiny chance he'd still be alive today. Tiny. And you know, ladies and gentlemen, as I talk to you right now, there are billions of people all over the world who are suffering in silence. And to give every one of them that tiny chance to just have one conversation that might lead to some form of recovery, that is worth fighting for every single day of my life. It's worth fighting for. And my plea to all of you who are listening today is that you would take that on and you would begin to think about in your roles, in your organizations, what is it that you could be doing to give every single person that tiny chance to be able to have a conversation that might just save a life. And so, yes, I kind of then began to lead a bit of work in Unilever around breaking the stigma of mental ill health, co-led a pilot here in the UK, back end of 2012, 2013, and middle of 2014 saw some of the success of that and decided to leave Unilever and go out into the world and live this life fueled by a sense of purpose. And you know, as I've traveled that road over the last 8 years, and somebody once said, having a sense of purpose in your life will take you to people and to places you could never, ever imagine. I can tell you, I could never, ever have imagined that I would be speaking at a global halotherapy symposium. I could never have imagined that. Well, here I am. And you know, as I've journeyed that path, there have been all sorts of insights and things that I have learned. But you know, probably the most powerful insight that I've had, and it has come as a result of my own crucible moment in life and the loss of my good friend, is I've begun to realize that the most valuable asset that I have is my well-being, is my well-being. And so you know what? I will dedicate 60 to 90 minutes every single day to care for the most valuable asset that I have. Where is your well-being on your list of priorities? Caring for your own well-being. And you know, I often think of the analogy or the metaphor of an air steward on an airplane who says to you during the safety briefing, if this airplane were to go down and an oxygen mask falls and you've got your daughter sitting next to you, who do you put the oxygen mask on first? You put the oxygen mask on yourself first, and then you tend to your daughter. Where is your oxygen mask? Where is your oxygen mask? And if I said to you and challenged you to think about, take your well-being as a priority and imagine a scale of 0 to 5. And say 0 is you spend no time every single day looking after the most valuable asset you have. And 5 is you spend 60 minutes a day, 80 minutes a day. Score yourself. Where are you? Where are you? There can be nothing more important than our own well-being. Somebody once said, make time for your wellness, because if you don't, you might one day be forced to make time for your illness. And so I'm going to leave you with a very, very simple acronym that I use every single day, which helps me to dedicate the 60 to 90 minutes. And yes, I can leave you this acronym and some ideas and some thoughts, but if your mindset is one of the oxygen mask on everybody else, you will find every excuse in the sun every single day not to dedicate time to your well-being. You will find all sorts of excuses because it's not a priority. But if it were a priority, you could apply this little acronym called CAN DO. Now, the C in CAN DO stands for connection. So you know what I'll do? I'll spend 5 minutes, 10 minutes every single day doing some connection. Connect with one of my daughters who are now living up in London. Connect with a friend who I haven't spoken to for a long, long time. Or just go and connect with nature. So connection is so important for our emotional health as part of our overall well-being. The A in CAN DO stands for be active. Just be active. And I'm not saying you have to go and run a marathon, but go and walk around the block for 30 minutes. Take the dog for a walk. If you haven't got a dog, just go for a walk, go for a little jog, do a bit of yoga, 30 minutes every single day to just be active. It's so good for our physical health. The N in can do, and I love the N. The N stands for just try and be nice to somebody every single day. Just be nice. I think it was Plato who once said, be kind to everybody that you meet. You know why? Because we're all fighting a harder battle. We are all fighting a harder battle. And you know what? It might take 30 seconds to be nice to somebody. A minute. The D stands for discover. Be curious. Learn something new. So I'll take 10 minutes, 15 minutes every single day to be curious about something, to learn something new. Listen to a podcast. Listen to an audiobook. Maybe learn a new skill. Do a Sudoku, a crossword. But just being curious and wanting to discover and learn is so good for our mental health, our neural pathways, as we oil those neural pathways. And then finally, the O in can do stands for observe. Take time every single day to do some observation. Now, another term for observation is recovery. And what do I mean by that? Every 2 hours, take a 5-minute recovery break. Imagine lying on a chair in a halotherapy room and just taking those 5 minutes to just recover every 2 hours. I'm sure most of you are in jobs where you've got meetings back to back. And you think, oh, I'll recover when I sleep. Well, we don't sleep very well. Or I'll recover when I go on holiday. Well, guess what? When you're on holiday, you're still dealing with emails. And so what I will do is I will build in 5 minutes every 2 hours to just recover. Maybe go outside and just stand in the daylight for 5 minutes. Do some breathing exercises. Maybe listen to a meditation app. Sit in a halotherapy chair and just take time out to just recover. So I leave you with that today, that simple acronym. But as I said, my challenge to you today is, where is your well-being in your list of priorities? And if you can elevate it to being the most important priority in your life, then you will truly engage in small little things every single day to maintain and look after the most valuable asset that you have. I can't leave you today without asking you all to consider joining me on my crusade. A crusade where the world is devoid of stigma around mental ill health. And I'd ask you to think of doing 3 things for me in joining me in my crusade. The first is reflect on your own relationship to mental ill health. What is that relationship? Are you intolerant and you see people like me as a snowflake? Or do you have a truly compassionate relationship to mental ill health? And for those of you out there that are intolerant, all I ask you to do is go and be curious. Just go and be curious. Just go and read, learn, talk to somebody who has suffered in the past. The second thing I ask you to do is just get this conversation going. Have this conversation amongst your friends, your family, your workplace. I honestly believe that if we can just have the conversation, anything is possible. John F. Kennedy once started a conversation in a small little office in the White House about putting a man on the moon and bringing him back safely. Guess what? It happened because they were able to have the conversation. And then finally, when you're ready, when you feel supported enough, when you might have had a bit of coaching, please tell your story, because we've all got a story. We've all got a story. Now, if you're going to tell a story of somebody else that has been close to you, please get their permission first. But we've all got a story of how we've been touched by mental ill health. And you know, every story that we tell every single story that we tell is like sending a lifeboat out into the ocean. And the billions of people who are suffering in silence as I speak to you right now, when they hear that story, when they see the lifeboat, do you know what they do? They cling on to it. And they realize two things. The first thing they realize is they're not alone. And the second thing they realize is they are just a normal human being like me. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Geoff. That was incredible. As always, you've touched on so many points that create both reflection and curiosity. Even though I've heard your story a number of times now, it is always captivating, moving, and inspirational. I do always remember that day when you told me about the story about the oxygen mask and the aeroplane, and I do try and live by that. I am sure there are many others listening today that will have some great takeaways from this, and I think everyone will agree that this was an absolutely incredible way to kick off the 2021 symposium.